Hello, and thank you for sitting down for an interview with us. Would you mind giving us your name and a little bit about your history?
I'm Hubert Gilliam, born and raised in a little town in southwest Virginia, Wise, in 1918. Went in the service when I was 15 years old in Bristol, Tennessee. And the sergeant put me on the scales, and he said, "Son, I can't take you, you just weigh 113 pounds. And my friend had $3, this was back in 1934 during the Depression. He said, "Sergeant, we're going out and get a sandwich." Go ahead. He brought a big bunch of bananas, and I ate about 3 pounds of them. I went back in, I said, "Sergeant, weigh me again." He put me on the scales. He said, "You're right on the money." And they took me in the Army and sent me up into New York Harbor off of New London, Connecticut in the Coast Artillery Post. I was green as a gourd, never been no further than Norton or Appalachia in my life. And I was in the kitchen peeling potatoes. The colonel heard they had a kid in the Army. And he sent the MP down to get me. And he said, "The colonel wants you at headquarters." Scared me death. I went in, trembling with saluting. And the colonel said, "How old are you, boy?" I said, "I'm 18, sir." He said, "I asked you how old you was. He's going to send me home." I hung my head and I said, 15. "Where you from, son?" I said, "Wise, Virginia." And this is during the depth of the Depression. He said, "Is there much unemployment down there, son?" I said, "Sir, the only people working I know of is a rural mail car and the postmaster." And he said, "How many is your family, son?" I said, 4 boys. "What's your father do?" I said, "He doesn't have a job." He said, "You didn't graduate from high school, did you, son?" I said, "No, sir, like 1 year." He said, "Would you go back to school if you had a chance?" I said, "Yes, sir." So he said, "Young man, you go out of this headquarters and walk around and come back in here. I won't talk to you." I won't come in. He said, "You're 18 years old now." He said, "We could have a good post school. You're starting school Monday morning. You're excused from all duties. I'll call the principal. You go get your books. I'll call your battery commander." And he pointed and said, "You better study, young man. I'm going to send you to West Point." Well, thinking about it, I don't remember taking the book home when I was in Wise to study. But they turned the lights out at 9 o'clock, and I'd go into John and study sometimes all night. I wanted to be one of those little second lieutenants to go to West Point. Well, I graduated from high school, took the West Point test for a presidential appointment, made 98 something on it. Some booger beat me out, and I didn't get to go to West Point. I finished 3 years. I come home. The Depression was easing up a little bit. We had the 15th Infantry in Tientsin, China, put there during the Boxer Rebellion. But you couldn't go there as a recruit. You had to be a previous serviceman to go to China. So I come back to Bristol and re-enlisted for Tientsin, China, the 15th Infantry. Went back to Brooklyn Army Base. And these big Army transports would pick up men going to Panama, Presidio, Honolulu, Philippines, and China. They called off serial numbers, all laying men up the gangplank. About 6 o'clock, they pulled the gangplank up and left 14 of us standing there, all going to China. Captain come down and said, "The base commander wants to talk to y'all up in the office." We went up, and he pointed at us. He said, "Gentlemen, you've been scratching the sailor list." Said, "The Japanese have sunk a gunboat of ours in the Yangtze River and killed some of our people. We're bringing the 15th Infantry back to the Philippines." He said, "You can go there, the Philippines, or you can go any place where we have army, or you can take a discharge for the convenience of the government." So I'm standing there, and another man going to China with me, he gathers me in the ribs, said, "Gilliam, I'm from Louisville, Kentucky." Said, "I was out at Fort Knox the other day," and said, "Everybody out there is riding a motorcycle, half-track, armored car, tank." Said, "Golly, they're mechanized. Let's go down there." I reassigned for Fort Knox. I laid my papers down in front of Colonel Chaffee, he was a colonel then. And he looked at them, and he looked up at me, and he looked at my papers, and he said, "You look awful young to be a previous serviceman going to China." I said, "Sir, I went in from 15, I'm 18 now." "Oh." He said, "We've got great things going." He said, "I was in China in my younger days." And I said, and he said, "We have great things going to happen at Fort Knox here. Would you like to be my personal aide?" I said, "Yes, sir." And I was General Chaffee's personal aide from 1937 to 1940. And here, about a year and a half ago, the phone rang and said, "Colonel Gilliam, would you come up to Fort Knox and be our guest speaker for the graduation armor school?" I said, "Colonel, why are you calling me?" He said, "I was going through an old headquarters book and saw you was General Chaffee's aide from 1937 to 1940. Said, he's dead and his wife's dead and his son." He said, "Colonel Gilliam, you're the only living human being can tell us personal things about General Chaffee, and we want to hear it. Bring your wife, we'll pay the expenses." Well, I thought it'd be 15 or 22nd lieutenant, so my wife and I, we drove up on Friday, and across from the Patton Museum, they had a hotel, they had us 2 rooms, and desserts and bananas and ice cream in a freezer. And the general sent a reporter over to talk to me about my military career, and it come out from Armed Forces magazine. The next morning, a sergeant knocked on the door and said, "Colonel Gilliam, the general said to take you and your wife over to the Patton Museum this morning." And that was on Saturday, and I was to speak that night. And I still thought it was 15 or 22nd lieutenants. So we went over to the Patton Museum. The wife said, "Can I take a camera, Sergeant?" He said, "Yes, ma'am." We went over, and there's Patton, George Patton, with his pearl handle pistols on in a mannequin and all his records. And there's those little old motorcycles, half-tracks, and little old tanks we had back in the 30s. And there's a big oil painting of General Chaffee. And my wife said, "Now get over there, I'm going to take a picture of him." She took a couple of pictures of me standing by the oil painting of General Chaffee. And I looked down, there was a little brass plaque there that said, "Born in 1889 and died in 1940. I looked at my wife and I said, "That's not right. He was born in 1884. He told me. Was on maneuvers in Fort Riley, Kansas in 37. And he was shaving one morning and said, 'Come here, Gilliam.' And he pointed in a westerly direction. And he said to me, 'Gilliam, I was born in Junction City, Kansas in 1884. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, Gilliam, my father is the only man to go from a private to a 3-star general in the United States Army." And his name was Admiral Lamont Chaffee. Well, I said to my wife, "I'm going in the office and tell them that's not right." And she said, "Oh, you'll just embarrass us." I said, "I don't give a dang, it's not right." So I went in, half door, and a girl sitting there. I said, "Is the director in?" "Yes, sir." I'd like to speak to him. She went and got him. I introduced myself and shook hands with him. And he said, "I've been the director for 30 years. I'm retiring in about a month." And I said, "Sir, my wife and I have enjoyed the museum. You've done a wonderful job." Very polite, and I said, "Thank you, sir, thank you." And then I said, "You made a little mistake." We got a little nasty then. And he looked at me and said, "What the hell do you mean a mistake, mister?" I said, "You've got General Chaffee's birthday wrong on that little brass plaque." He said, "How in the hell do you know?" I said, "He told me." He brightened up and he said, "Are you Colonel Gilliam, the guest speaker for the graduation night?" I said, "I've been invited to hear you speak." He went back and got a book and come out, and there it was, born 1884, and he apologized. Well, we went down to the big brick building, and there's about a dozen colonels in there, the wives, and we was being introduced.